Bore da, good morning everyone and welcome to the Housing First Wales Conference 2022. We're delighted to have so many people registered for this event where we'll be hearing from speakers from across the UK and as far afield as the USA. We'll be starting off with publication of the first ever Housing First Wales stats, which show the scale and the effect of the model here in Wales. We'll then be hearing from the Minister for Climate Change about her vision for Housing First in Wales, and she will then announce the accreditation of the third project to receive the Housing First Wales accreditation. We'll then move on to Housing First for Women, where we'll be hearing from our colleagues in Leeds talk about how their project is supporting women to access housing first and thrive in their tenancies. We'll also be holding a discussion with our colleagues from England and Scotland about the concept of graduation. What are the challenges? Is it a red herring? Should we be talking about graduation or should we not, in light of the key principle about support being unlimited? We'll also hear from Gareth from Cymru about his research into access to mental health and substance use services for Housing First project across Wales and how this is operating in different areas at both an operational and strategic level. And I'm delighted that we'll be finishing our conference hearing from colleagues from Pathways Vermont, who will be talking about their Housing First scheme delivered in rural areas and also within the context of the mental health system. So I'm really excited for today's event. I hope that you are too. Please do interact using the Q&A throughout all of the sessions, and please tweet us on Twitter using the hashtag HFW22. So first of all, I'm delighted to be talking about the data that we have published for the first time today. So the Housing First in Wales has been going for a number of years and it has expanded considerably over the last few years. The Welsh Government has just published its Ending Homelessness Action Plan, and within that it is committed to expanding Housing First to all local authorities in Wales. So we thought it was timely to take stock about how far we've come, but also to consider what is the scale of Housing First and what is the impact on things like tenancy sustainment. So a huge thank you to all of the projects who've been busy submitting their statistics over the last few months. I know it's been a bit of an arduous process, but I think it's been really worthwhile, particularly when we can see the scale and impact and reach of these services across different parts of the country. So here's some of the highlights from our statistics today. So we collected statistics from 15 different projects operating across 15 local authority areas in Wales. The period of which the data referred to was from the 1st of February 2018. This coincides with the date that the Welsh Government first published its guidance on Housing First in Wales and clearly stated its intention to deliver the model in line with international principles. We thought that this would be an ideal moment to start the data collection. This set of data runs until the 30th of September 2021, but we're currently collecting the next 6 months worth of data and hope to publish that very soon. And we plan to publish the data in 6 months tranches as we move forward so that you can see how Housing First develops here in Wales. So as you can see, 521 people have been supported by Housing First in Wales since the 1st of February 2018. And this includes people who have entered tenancies, but it also importantly includes all of those people who are being engaged through assertive outreach and pre-tenancy support, because we know that Housing First sometimes takes time, that people may not be ready to engage with services, particularly if they've had poor experiences of services in the past. We know that our Housing First support workers work incredibly hard to build those trusting relationships and hopefully get to a point where people then feel comfortable to talk about entering a tenancy. So the scale is enormous, and a huge congratulations to all of the projects who have worked so hard to support so many people throughout Wales. We also looked at the number of tenancies that have started. So in total, between the 1st of February 2018 and 30th of September 2021, 245 tenancies were started across those 15 local authority areas in Wales. Interestingly, those are fairly evenly split between housing association properties, local authority properties, and the private rented sector, showing that all those different parts of the housing system have a really important role to play in delivering housing first. And I'd like to pay tribute to those landlords, both private rented sector and social landlords, who have embraced this model, who have given up their properties to contribute to the delivery of housing first. We know that sometimes there can be fears about whether people will be able to maintain tenancies, but I think what we'll see in the next few stats is that with the right support from multi-agencies, and that's intensive and non-time limited, that people can be really successful in those tenancies. So our next stat shows the tenancy sustainment rate so far in Wales, and I'm absolutely delighted that it stands at 90%. Internationally, the evidence suggests that tenancy sustainment rate for Housing First tends to be between 80 and 90%. So it's really pleasing to see Wales at the upper end of that level. And to put it into context, the people who benefit from Housing First Wales and the people who are targeted for Housing First tenancies are those who have experienced the most entrenched homelessness, who have really been marginalised by society, who often have co-occurring experiences of trauma, of mental health issues and substance use issues, and who have often struggled to access and maintain tenancies through our traditional systems, which have often required them to go through several instances of temporary accommodation. But I think this shows the power of the Housing First model, that 90% of the people who've been supported into tenancies are still maintaining those tenancies. And this is huge credit, not only to the support staff within those Housing First projects who work tirelessly to provide really trauma-informed, person-centred support to people, but also the range of other agencies such as mental health, substance use services, probation, and others who have really worked hard to embrace this model to make their contribution towards a success. And you can all be really proud of what you have achieved. We also looked into the reasons why tenancies had ended. Obviously, we're delighted with the 90%, but it's always useful to try and understand why that 10% didn't manage to succeed in those Housing First tenancies. As you can see from the slide here, it's for a range of reasons. Unfortunately, a number of people entered prison and therefore were not able to continue their Housing First tenancies. As with any other area of support, we absolutely advocate for people who are on short-term sentences to be able to return to their properties. But unfortunately, if people are entering prison for a lengthy stretch of time, then clearly that tenancy is not going to be able to continue. Also, sadly, a number of people have died as a result of some of the physical and mental health issues that people experience. We know that people with significant experience of homelessness have much worse health outcomes than the general population. Various statistics have shown that people with experience of entrenched homelessness can die up to 30 years younger than the general population. So this statistic's really sad. It highlights the ongoing challenges we have in trying to make sure that people who experience homelessness get the healthcare that they need. And I think shows that the clear importance of health agencies working really closely with Housing First projects to make sure people get the help and support that they need. Other people, it's been felt appropriate for people to move into other health or social care placements where they continue to get the help and support that they need, but in terms of a different context. And small numbers chose to leave the tenancy or plan to move on to a non-Housing First tenancy, and one person was evicted. But as I said, overwhelmingly, these statistics are really positive, and a 90% tenancy sustainment rate is at the upper end of the international studies and something that projects should be incredibly proud of. We also collected data on the numbers of people who are waiting to be matched with a Housing First tenancy. And I don't need to tell people at this conference about the housing crisis and the difficulty that we have in finding truly affordable accommodation for people. Unfortunately, there are still people who would really benefit from a Housing First approach, from that intensive, non-time limited multi-agency support, who have not been able to find a tenancy as of yet. We know that this is a much wider problem, that that extends beyond Housing First, but re-emphasises the call for landlords, both private and social, to please support the expansion of Housing First, to consider letting your properties to people under Housing First projects. And as you can see, hopefully that 90% tenancy sustainment rate gives you confidence that that intensive support helps people to succeed in those tenancies. And as of this moment, 2 projects have gained the Housing First Wales accreditation. That's the Housing First Conwy Denbighshire project, led by Conwy Council, and Housing First in Cardiff, led by the Salvation Army. But we're delighted to shortly be announcing accreditation number 3. Finally, I'd like to thank all of the projects that contributed these statistics. I know how busy you are delivering these incredibly important services, but I hope that from the statistics we've been able to publish today, you can see the benefit of sharing those, because I think a 90% tenancy sustainment rate is fantastic. I think the scale of the support that you are delivering across different areas of Wales is excellent. So a huge thank you to those teams who have worked so hard to deliver services, but also send us their statistics. We're really, really proud that Wales is embracing Housing First, and we're delighted that the Welsh Government have got those plans to expand it in every local authority area across Wales. And we hope to see that map on the slide fill up with that green colour to show that it is present in all local authorities in Wales very, very soon. So please do check out our Twitter account. We have been tweeting links to the article that shows those statistics, and also links to the document where you can see those statistics in full and carefully consider those and celebrate them, hopefully, on social media. Next, we're delighted to be moving on to remarks from the Minister for Climate Change. So unfortunately, Julie James was unable to be here today, but she was really, really keen to speak to you all, to share her vision for Housing First in Wales, and to emphasise just how important this model is to the Welsh Government's ambition to end homelessness. So as a result, she found time in her very busy diary to pre-record a speech for us, and I'm really delighted that we're able to share it with you today.
Thank you so much for inviting me today to open the Housing First conference, and I'm really, really sorry that we've had to pre-record this and I can't be there with you. I want to start once more by thanking everyone for their really hard work over the past 2 years and their continuing dedication to the ongoing challenge. Over 20,000 people have been supported since the start of the pandemic, and nearly 8,000 are still being supported in temporary accommodation. I'm fully aware of the range of challenges you are all faced with now on a daily basis, and I want you all to know just how much I appreciate all that you have done and continue to do. Clearly, the ongoing cost of living crisis and, of course, the invasion of Ukraine has added more pressure to the system in Wales. But that does not mean we can afford to take our eye off the long-term ambitions we all have. If anything, it means it's more important than ever to plan and develop systems and structures that allow for homelessness services to undertake the transformational shift required to move to prevention and rapid rehousing. So let me reassure you that I recognise that this is a long-term transformation, and no one expects the transition to rapid rehousing to take place overnight. Likewise, we expect plans to be adapted early during the early iterations and over the next couple of years, as more time is spent working through the various challenges, including moving people on who are currently in temporary accommodation. Within a rapid rehousing approach, Housing First does, of course, remain a key component of our ambitions to make homelessness rare, brief and unrepeated in Wales. It isn't just an effective solution for some of our citizens with the most complex needs. It is empirically the most effective solution, providing the right level of support is made available, and therefore it must be a significant part of the move to rapid rehousing approach right across Wales. But rapid rehousing isn't just about moving quickly people through the system. It is about accurately assessing a person's support needs and the wishes of that individual and developing a truly tailored response. Many people will require or request longer stays in different forms of temporary accommodation, and each case will need to be treated and considered individually. But for most, we need the system to be focused on supporting and stabilising people in their own home or a new home at the earliest possible point, and increasing the likelihood of it being sustained for the long term rather than just the short term. We've made it clear the position Housing First has within the spectrum of rapid rehousing, but also in the way that many of the key principles of Housing First can be extended to everyone who presents. Principles such as developing truly person-centred services so that more tailored approaches can be delivered in order that long-term solutions can be found for everyone who presents. We must, however, resist the temptation to dilute our existing Housing First services in the face of additional demand. In order to fully implement rapid rehousing, we must work to build enough capacity so that every person who needs an intensive service, such as Housing First, can actually access it. Failure to do so will inevitably lead to some people in Wales with the most complex needs left without a service that can properly address them. This transformation is about developing systems that can provide help and support to everyone who presents with the aim of finding long-term solutions. So that is why I'm fully supportive of the Housing First Network's accreditation process, because it ensures that we have a gold standard in Wales. It allows us to highlight those projects in Wales which have the highest fidelity and which international evidence tells us will deliver the highest levels of tenancy sustainability. Which leads me neatly onto the publication today of the first Housing First data. This is also a key element of our approach to highlight the benefit of adopting a high fidelity Housing First project. The 90% sustainability rates evident in the release, I have to say, is at the higher end of what we felt was possible when we began the Housing First journey back in 2017. The next key challenge will be increasing the scale of Housing First across Wales. The rapid rehousing transition plans are a key component in understanding how many people annually will require the intensive option. But now comes the hard part of developing new projects in areas without Housing First and gradually increasing the capacity of existing projects to meet the full demand. And now the Housing First Network and all of the existing Housing First projects will play their part in supporting this journey. And I'm deeply grateful to you for the part that you will play. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, and we really, really appreciate you being here to speak to the conference. Now, we're absolutely delighted to announce the third Housing First project to be awarded the Housing First Wales accreditation. This organisation has worked incredibly hard over the last few months, providing us with the evidence we needed to assess whether they are delivering Housing First in line with the principles. As you know, Minister, it's a very rigorous process with scrutiny of the organisation's policies and procedures, interviews with Housing First tenants, staff, commissioners, landlords and partner organisations. This is then followed by an interim recommendations report, which this organisation embraced and fully committed to further development and improvement. Finally, following a scrutiny by a panel of independent experts who looked carefully at the evidence and posed even more questions to the project, there was a unanimous and enthusiastic decision to award the accreditation to this project. Minister, we'd be delighted if you could announce the accreditation of the third project to receive this award.
Diolch, Katie. I am absolutely delighted to announce the third project to be awarded the Housing First Wales accreditation is Housing First Anglesey, which is led by the Wallich in partnership with Anglesey Council, local health services, criminal justice representatives, and a range of private and social landlords. They were established in 2013, initially as a pilot, and it's the longest running Housing First project in Wales. They've supported hundreds of people experiencing homelessness, and it's really heartening to hear that this is being delivered in line with our Housing First principles. I know, as you just said, Katie, that the accreditation process is really rigorous, with countless policies and procedures scrutinised by Cymorth's Housing First manager, Osmond, and in a series of in-depth interviews with project staff, clients, landlords, commissioners, and other partners. And the panel of independent experts have gone through all the evidence, they've met the project managers and made the decision about awarding the accreditation. So given the current pressures I just referenced, it makes this accreditation all the more impressive. And I'm so pleased to hear about the extensive work during this process to improve and develop the service. So I'm delighted to congratulate Housing First Anglesey and to Joe Parry in particular, the service manager, who's here to formally accept the accreditation. Many congratulations, Joe, richly deserved.
Oh, thank you, Minister. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, it's when you were describing it then and kind of what we've been doing since 2013, it's been quite an emotional journey. But as you're describing it, it makes us feel extremely proud that we've been accredited with the accreditation from Cymorth. So yeah, thank you very, very much. Obviously, we couldn't have done it without such a dedicated team. So, I'd like to thank the team for all their hard work and support over the years. The accreditation has been kind of a long and lengthy process. We've learned lots of lessons along the way, working within the principles, and obviously, you know, it's just so much information, and speaking to partners and clients and staff alike. We've just learned so much, so thank you. Really, really proud to have received it. Thank you to Alex and Katie and the team, and thank you to my managers for supporting me, as well as obviously our team supporting me also, to obviously deliver such you know, such a great service really on the island. And yeah, thank you, Minister, for the kind words. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, a huge thank you to the Minister and to Joe for making themselves available a few days ago to do the announcement of the awarding of that accreditation. As you can see, the Minister was really pleased to be able to announce that, and paid huge tribute to the Wallich and their team and their partners in delivering such a successful project in line with the principles. So I'd now like to welcome Alex Osmond, our Housing First and Lived Experience Manager, and Joe Parry, who is the Housing First Service Manager from the Wallich, to join us on screen. Welcome, Alex, and welcome, Joe. So this is an opportunity for us to have a chat about the process that Joe was put through with her team. She's still just about standing, or at least sitting, and also to hear reflections from Alex, who has taken 3 different organisations through this process and always comments on the amount of learning that he takes from the process. So as we heard earlier, it's a fairly rigorous process. It starts with initial conversations with the provider about whether they're interested in undertaking the accreditation, explains the process to them, and then the commitment happens. So documents are signed and sent to the Housing First Manager, and an interview plan is agreed and carried out according to the Housing First assessment framework. So following, as I said, the rigorous scrutiny of all of those policies and procedures and interviews with lots of staff, clients, commissioners, partners, an interim recommendations report is produced and shared with the project, and that summarises the evidence that has been found across each of the 10 Housing First Wales principles, and also offers some comment about potential issues or potential areas for further evidence or areas for further development and improvement. The project then has a period of time to respond to those, liaising with the Housing First Manager, and once an appropriate stage has been reached, the Housing First Manager, Alex, writes a report that then goes to an independent Housing First panel. This time it was made up of 3 different people. It was Tamsin Sterling, who's an independent housing consultant that many of you will know, Joy Williams from the Housing Support Networks Project, and also Rebecca Jackson, who currently works for Platform and is formerly of Shelter Cymru. And we'd like to express huge gratitude to those 3 members of the panel who gave up a whole day of their time to consider all of the evidence and make their decision. So after all of that, the decision's made, and in this case, it was a very positive and very unanimous decision from the panel. So as I said, now's an opportunity to reflect on the process with Alex and Joe. Please do submit any questions that you have using the Q&A, but we'll crack on with some of the questions that we've received already. So first of all, Joe, how did you find the accreditation process?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if the mic was on. How did we find it? So for us, we actually started the journey back in 2020, but because of COVID, there were lots of stop, start. So it has been quite a lengthy process, but it's shown stamina, determination on behalf of obviously the staff and obviously you guys for persevering with us. But very stop start, but COVID.
Yeah, and that has been unfortunate, hasn't it? Obviously we entered the kind of crisis phase of COVID, where services had to kind of put down everything else and focus on responding to the pandemic. But we're really pleased to have been able to pick up the accreditation and reach this excellent point. Alex, as I said, you've taken 3 organisations now through the process. How did you find this accreditation process, and how did it compare to previous ones?
That is an interesting question. As you say, we've taken 3 projects through this process now. They've all felt quite different. You're talking to different people, different services. What I would say is that with the Wallich and Anglesey, we spent, for various reasons, we spent quite a lot of time talking through the recommendations and making sure that the project staff and the partners were kind of on the same page as us and determining what we meant by different phrases and that kind of thing. And I think that's reflected in the report, where those sections about kind of the response to recommendations and kind of what's being done to action them, those sections are quite long and involved. And that was a really kind of interesting development, and it's something I'll definitely take forward.
Definitely. And one of the things that I think you've reflected on with me is the conversations with, for example, commissioners. And actually in previous accreditations, you've maybe spoken predominantly to project staff about recommendations, but actually in this process, you were able to extend that to commissioners. And I think that was quite a positive part of this process, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So again, something we'll definitely take forward. Speaking to that kind of that top strategic level of people involved in the project, like the commissioning team, was really useful and interesting this time around. And some of those conversations were really valuable. And it's clear that the team up in Anglesey, the commissioning team, are very devoted to delivering Housing First according to the principles. And I'm really excited to have some more of those conversations with other projects in the future.
And we've tried to do something, haven't we, with this accreditation that recognises in the certificate that we'll be sending to Joe, and also the report, that this is a team effort, that obviously the Wallich play an incredibly important role in leading this, but actually the contributions of the partner agencies, landlords, commissioners are really valuable, aren't they?
Absolutely. In theory, the accreditation has always been awarded to the range of organisations and partners involved. But one thing that we thought of this time around was that we should kind of more explicitly make that clear and just kind of more overtly, pay credit to those other partners, which we've obviously mentioned already, and they're mentioned in the various documentation. And again, going forward, we'll make sure we keep doing that. And, as I think you said, Katie, this is a learning process for me and for us, as well as for the projects and services involved. So, happy to take that kind of knowledge forward and keep developing this process.
Excellent. And Alex, just before we go back to Joe, what were some of the positive examples that you saw during the accreditation process? Because one of the things that we like to take from the accreditation is not just kind of viewing this in isolation for the project, but kind of identifying some of the really good practice that we can share with others. And I know that you'll be doing that through the Housing First network in the coming weeks and months, but if you could maybe highlight some of the positive elements of this particular project.
There are quite a few, so I'll choose some, most of which were also noted by the panel that you mentioned. I think a lot of the great practice that's going on in Anglesey comes from a real culture of learning and reflection at the Wallich and in Anglesey in particular, as well as a kind of a drive to educate partners and kind of go on that journey together. So there are some areas of good practice that are kind of often seen as difficult across the sector, quite rightly, because they're not easy to get right. Things like a harm reduction approach and developing that culture of being open to learning and reflection, which the panel spoke very highly of, and I'd seen lots of examples of, which again you'll find in the report. And again, something else I'd mention, and we'll touch on this in a later session today, I would imagine, but the lengths that the Wallich and Anglesey goes to kind of make sure that people who maybe aren't receiving such extensive support and have been kind of with the project in theory for years and, always have access to kind of return to re-engage with that support. And they kind of seem to manage that really well. And again, I'm sure Joe will talk more about that later on today.
Fantastic. And some of the things that are pretty unique to this project, the extent to which links are built with the private rented sector. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Sorry, Katie, you're talking to me?
Yeah, Alex.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, sorry, that's another. This is the certainly, as far as I know, in terms of engagement with the private rented sector, this is the Housing First project we have in Wales that does that to the greatest extent. As we've mentioned, they do work with the with social housing as well, but there are a lot of seemingly very dedicated PRS landlords on the island there, and the strength of the relationships between those landlords and project staff are testament to the kind of time and drive that both parties have put into this work, and it's it is pretty unique, and it was really great to see.
Thanks very much, Alex. And really interesting, I think, for other projects or projects that are due to start to think about, because we often, I guess, probably have an over-reliance on the social sector, which is great because, we have existing relationships and trusting relationships. But I think, one of the things that the panel was really struck by was the excellent relationships with the private rented sector. And Joe, I wonder whether you could tell us a little bit more about that, about how, I guess, the background to why you decided to embark on those relationships with the private rented sector, and how you've done so well at kind of developing and maintaining those relationships.
Yeah, so I think initially when the project started, which is back in 2013, we took the approach that obviously social housing, even back then was kind of in short supply, and there was a greater demand, but we knew on the island that there were lots of private landlords, so we also found that very often people perhaps, didn't advertise through an agent. Therefore, the best way to kind of go and look for these properties was literally boots on the ground and kind of walking about, knocking doors and what have you, shops, flats above, etc., etc. So we kind of developed relationships quite quickly with private landlords in different areas. And, at first it was managing really their expectations whilst us needing the accommodation, but also managing those expectations of landlords. And Anglesey isn't, that big of a place. And a lot of, I've said this before, but a lot of landlords know other landlords. And so you've got to be really careful and mindful that we're not just at any cost. So that support has got to be there for the landlord as well as our client, So yeah, we kind of developed relationships pretty much in the early days, and some of those landlords are still with us now, and some of them perhaps were with us for the first 12 months, and then for them perhaps it wasn't right, and onwards and upwards, but I'm pleased to say that some of them are still with us. So I think that's testament to the support that was put in place for the people that we were supporting,
Oh, absolutely. I think that's huge credit to your team for developing and managing those relationships over the years. And I know that lots of people at the moment are worried about the volatility in the private rented sector market because of, rents and cost of living and things like upcoming legislation, and that's causing them worries. But you were telling us at the panel that actually the positive relationships that you've developed has led to, instead of landlords kind of getting worried about this and moving out of the market, actually they come and talk to you about these issues, don't they?
Yeah, well, we've certainly had a couple that have come to us, and as we said on the panel day, somebody kind of offered us, which we've not pursued, but somebody offered us kind of management of the building because he's perhaps of an age where, with the changes afoot, and we didn't want to have to deal with it. But then another landlord who has got some of our clients historically from back in 2013, who are still there, settled, have never wanted to move from there because they're quite happy with, that is home. So that landlord has approached us and basically said, can you just kind of point me in the right direction? So obviously we're not his managing agent, and neither are we somebody there to help him draw up kind of, contracts. But I think it's just that knowing he's got a little bit of support and somebody at the end of the phone has given confidence. So every time in the past, if he's had something available, he's contacted us first,
Oh, that's fantastic. And Alex, reflecting on some of the other positives from this process, there was, I think, real evidence of the kind of client choice, but also being strengths-based. And there were some examples, weren't there, about clients who wanted to apply for jobs or even wanted to set up their own business, and that these aspirations were really embraced by the project, and they were supported to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've mentioned some key examples there. The conversations that I have with clients tend to be really fulfilling and interesting and moving part of doing this work. And yes, there were examples of clients who were given all the choice possible, not just in terms of kind of where they wanted to live and that kind of thing, which is taking place, obviously. But as you say, clients who were kind of looking for support to set up their own businesses while they were doing other jobs, that kind of thing, things that would kind of tax any of us. And they had dedicated support workers that were working closely with them to kind of empower them to make the choices that were right for them, which is really, really fantastic to see. Yeah,
and really good evidence of that culture that we need to see of, Housing First doesn't place preconditions on people entering tenancies. People are not kind of waiting to be judged as housing ready. They're assumed to be housing ready and given that home as quickly as possible. And then also in line with the stuff around being strengths-based and fulfilling people's aspirations. So positive to hear that support was always looking to support those aspirations. So, Joe, we've got a question that's come in on the chat from Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. How do your Housing First clients afford private rented sector market rates of rent?
How do they afford them? Did you say? Sorry.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
With difficulty. I'm not going to lie, it is extremely difficult at the moment. Rent locally, obviously, we are pretty much a holiday island, 70,000 people and probably a big percentage of senior citizens, but there's a lot of holiday accommodation. Therefore, there tends to be less residential kind of private lets and things. So what is available tends to be higher rents. So it can be a challenge. We've been really quite fortunate at managing to find kind of through the local authority, maybe rent in advance, deposits even, it's challenging. But at the moment, one of the staff has just said to me that somebody's got a viewing tomorrow, actually, to go and see a property, and it's 380 a month. And it's, but that's the norm. So it's just about kind of managing expectations, but also we're quite good at negotiating with landlords to kind of maybe try and reduce a little bit, because, sometimes the higher the rent, you can think, yeah, I'm going to charge 400, and then maybe you don't get paid. Whereas if maybe you're willing to take a little bit less and the tenant is supported, it's more likely to be a successful tenancy. So it's just about negotiation, really. But rents are high.
And again, that's just testament to the relationships that you've built with landlords who are willing to have those conversations with you rather than go to the highest bidder. But I think also points to the importance of local authority schemes to help projects with things like bonds or rent in advance, to just help make that kind of first step into that tenancy. Absolutely. But also highlights the wider issues that the Welsh Government needs to tackle in terms of the impact of second homes on local communities and the ability for people to afford to buy or rent in those markets.
Yeah.
Rebecca has asked the question, are you finding the landlords in your area worried about the new legislation changing in December? Has this affected your options in the rented sector? I think, Joe, you were just reflecting on how some had come to you with questions and you were trying to point them in the right direction. But is that something that you're finding quite common amongst landlords that you're either working with currently or maybe approaching in the future?
I think, certainly locally for landlords, different ones that we've spoken to, some are literally selling up. They just don't want to have to deal with or facilitate the changes that are afoot. It has made people nervous. the thought of, you know, kind of maybe having to give 6 months notice, unless of course there's been a breach, you know, around maybe arrears or antisocial behaviour. But I think, you know, certainly some people are concerned about it. And then I think some people just, you know, literally go with the change, you know. So mixed feelings really, but I think there are more properties, when you look about, there are more properties that perhaps were, whether it be a HMO or, you know, flats that have gone for sale, you know.
Absolutely. And again, I think it shows the strength of being able to have a long running relationship with a landlord who's maybe been with you for a number of years. And actually they're not looking to evict people with a 6 months or a 2 months notice or a 1 month notice. Actually, they're settled, they're pleased with how the project is supporting their tenant, and they're happy to continue. Joe, we mentioned earlier that the interim recommendations report midway through the process provides an opportunity for projects to kind of further consider, you know, developing policies and practice and consider other areas for improvement. What were the main things that you learned or developed as a result of the interim recommendations process?
If I say there were numerous, probably too many to mention without going through the report again, which is in front of me, and lots of highlighted bits. But I think things that perhaps became apparent were because, for myself, because I've been here since 2013, and then obviously staff come and go, and, you know, some of them have been here for, you know, 3-4 years. But it became apparent that when, obviously, because the staff were interviewed as well as, you know, clients and, you know, partners, etc. But it became apparent that perhaps people's perception of what the project was or how it was delivered or was slightly different. It's like maybe not that it got watered down, but maybe it needed to be a bit more consistent. So it highlighted that really there was a need for us to go back to the teams and literally, not just our team, but partners, and re-educate ourselves and others really on what Housing First actually is, you know, making sure that we were taking, you know, the right tenants and other clients, and that we were adhering to the principles. And so that was one of the main things that did come out of it. And I think another thing that really came out of it was terminology. So I think it was highlighted within one of the tenancy agreements from the local authority, actually, that they were still kind of older tenancies, and talking about warden managed or warden control, which of course they've not been warden managed for a number of years. So it highlighted things that had just been overlooked and missed, you know.
Thanks, Joe. And that's a really good point about, you know, particularly for teams that have been going for a while, who might have new staff coming in, or even expanding and growing the teams, to kind of make sure that there continues to be that clear understanding of what Housing First is, what all the principles mean and how that works in practice, in order to make sure that you're continuing to develop the projects in line with the principles. And I think that's probably a lesson for all projects out there, to kind of continually think about how they're making sure that that consistency of approach is there, that they're reminding staff about the principles and reiterating things in team meetings or other fora for staff to continue to be, you know, delivering in line with the principles, because we know that is how Housing First is the most successful. Alex, what are your reflections on how the team responded to the interim recommendations report?
Well, as I kind of mentioned, the fact that those sections in the final report are a lot longer, I think, reflects some of the conversations that we had in kind of teasing out those recommendations. From what I can see, you know, from what I saw, Jo and her team spent a lot of time from the moment we started discussing these recommendations, and they went through a few drafts. But from the moment we started, they were being, as Jo said, discussed with kind of new starters there. They were reviewing documentation. They were really trying to begin acting on all these things from kind of the earliest point, which I found very impressive. And again, I've tried to reflect, you know, in the final documentation.
Thanks, Alex. And yeah, I guess we've always talked about the accreditation process as not just being something that's I guess, judging the project on their fidelity, that it's an opportunity to strengthen and develop projects and support projects. It's always supposed to have been a supportive and constructive process. And hopefully, you know, reflecting on what you've both said about the response to the interim recommendations, it really has been that. And I was certainly really impressed by how the Wallich, but also your commissioner and your partners responded to some of those recommendations in a really thoughtful way that didn't view them as you know, in a negative light, but actually thought, actually, this is an opportunity for us to review and develop and learn from this. And I think that that learning culture that Alex referenced earlier on in this conversation is really, really important. It sets the tone, I think, for that continuous learning and development. And that's really, really positive. Just a quick reminder, if you want to submit any questions, please do so. We're probably getting to the end of the session, but I've got another question for Joe here. So I guess it's been a long journey. We've had a global pandemic in the middle of it, which has got slightly in the way, but you've got here now. So how pleased and proud are you and your team about this accreditation? What was the kind of, you know, the conversations within the team when you were able to tell them that you'd been successful?
I'm just extremely proud. You know, like I said, through no fault of anybody's, it's been a long process. I'm sure perhaps when maybe the other two went through the process, it wasn't quite as long. And, you know, I'm sure Alex tired of us because, you know, if there was kind of the report, you know, the interim report that came in and there was perhaps a list of to-dos or, you know, and then we'd be going back to him. And so there was a lot of backing and forth, but it was because obviously we wanted to get it right. So really for the team, I think it's just just an absolute relief. Really, really proud that we've been, you know, accredited. We kind of take for granted that we'd been doing it anyway, but to know that it's almost got that rubber stamp, you know, it's just a really, really proud moment. Yeah.
Definitely. Thanks, Joe. We've had a question from Paul in the chat, and I wonder whether I could get a response from both of you. What can commissioners do to encourage the success of Housing First? Alex, do you want to come in first? And then Joe, maybe you can reflect on what's been positive about your relationship with the commissioner on Anglesey. Alex.
So that's a really good question and a really important question because, you know, getting Housing First right from that level on down is the only way to really kind of achieve fidelity. I think what we saw in the case of the Wallich is that the commissioners really genuinely understand what Housing First is, understand what it can be and how it can work best according to its principles. And I think that that understanding is really important, but just that willingness to sort of to take recommendations or suggestions and get involved in the kind of conversations like the ones we had are kind of really important. And just kind of having that spirit of, you know, there were a few recommendations in this report where some of the documentation around commissioning needs to sort of, or should be changing slightly. And they took that on board and that will be happening. So I think that spirit is the kind of most important thing from my perspective.
Thanks, Alex. And Joe, any reflections that you have about the role of commissioners and what they can do to support Housing First?
So our commissioners have always been really kind of supportive of us and the work we do. I think they were kind of quite, you know, pioneering and instrumental back in 2012, I guess, when they first started talking about a Housing First project. And then, like I said, we started the project in April 2013 on the back of that, and it was a 12-month pilot. So they've always been really supportive of Housing First. I think that there is an awareness amongst their teams that they, like our team, you need to keep reminding yourself of what Housing First is, which they do. And I think it's just making sure that everybody, you know, is aware and yeah, that we're all ultimately keeping ourselves mindful of who it's for and what the aim is and what we're trying to achieve, you know. But they have been really supportive, yeah.
Fantastic. And I think for me, there's a couple of things. So one is about trying to make sure that a commissioner and the local authority more generally uses its influence to get other partners around the table from the very beginning of the process, if possible, because we know how critical services like mental health services, substance use services are to the success of the delivery. So I think commissioners kind of using that influence that they have in broader networks with other public services, I think is important. I think being really flexible and responsive to the team is also really important. And I think particularly where capacity might increase. For example, we know that there are currently about 8,000 people in temporary accommodation in Wales. There will be a proportion of those people for whom housing first is the right approach. And I think that, you know, it's really important that that is recognised, that resources are put in place, that when capacity is starting to be full, that conversations happening about extra resources rather than trying to get staff to compromise on caseloads. So that comes back, I think, to Alex's point about really understanding the principles, you know, and we talk about small caseloads within that because we know the intensity of the support is really important to help people thrive. So thank you, Paul, for that really brilliant question. So hopefully there are a few commissioners on the call who are thinking about that now. And thanks, Alex and Joe, for your replies. So before we wrap up, Joe, what would your advice be to other projects who might be considering embarking on the accreditation journey?
I'd just say do it. It's really, it highlights so much, things that perhaps you take for granted that you're unaware of. You know, like I said, it might be around language, terminology, you know, policies and procedures. But because it's, for want of a better word, because it's scrutinised, because it's quite a rigorous process, it does highlight things that perhaps you weren't particularly aware of. So yeah, I would absolutely say go for it. Brilliant, thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And Alex, what would your kind of words of advice be to any projects that are considering it, maybe thinking, is this a bit daunting? Do we want to do this right now? You know, what would your message be about the value of the accreditation process?
I think we've always tried to, you know, I understand the amount of work that is going on at services and projects under the kind of pressures that we've heard about from the minister. So I always try and work around that and not add too much to a workload, although obviously it is extra work. So I'm always open to discussing that with, of course, my doorbell goes during this conference. So I'm always open to discussing that with project staff. I'd also say just, you know, we're not out to put people on the spot or catch people out. We want to have honest conversations. We're after the same thing. So yeah.
Thanks very much, both. Really delighted to have you both here and to discuss that. I'm sure the conversations we've just had have been immensely valuable to people who are listening and watching from their projects across Wales. So diolch yn fawr iawn, and congratulations again to Joe and to the Housing First team on Anglesey. You should be incredibly proud of what you've achieved, and the certificate will be with you very shortly.
Thank you.
Thanks both. So just before we go, I want to remind you of the next session that we've got coming up at 11 o'clock. That focuses on Housing First for Women, learning from Leeds. And we'll be delighted to welcome Basis Yorkshire to talk about their work with specifically sex workers in Leeds, who they're supporting through their Housing First for Women project. So enjoy the short break, refresh yourselves, and hopefully we'll see you all at 11 o'clock for the next session. Thank you very much.